The flight attendant's voice rose, sharp and clear, cutting through the quiet hum of the cabin. It was loud enough for every passenger to hear, making it impossible to ignore. "I'm only going to ask you one last time. Move to the back of the plane, or I'll have no choice but to call security." Her words were laced with impatience, her tone dripping with condescension, each syllable sharpened to a point. Yet Naomi, the poised black woman sitting calmly in her seat, remained unshaken. She lifted her gaze to meet the flight attendant's glare, her expression unreadable. "I already told you I'm not moving," she said, her voice smooth, unwavering. There was no hint of anger, no aggression, just a quiet certainty that carried more weight than any raised voice ever could. There was strength in her words, an undeniable power. Though she was being humiliated in front of everyone, she refused to shrink. The other passengers watched, most of them silent, some whispering amongst themselves. No one expected what was about to happen next. No one could have predicted how the woman they assumed was powerless would rise and reveal who she truly was. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, if you believe in treating everyone with dignity and respect, no matter their background, hit that subscribe button now and let us know in the comments. Where are you watching from? The plane sat gleaming under the golden afternoon sun, its sleek exterior reflecting the light in a way that promised an exclusive, first-class experience. Inside, the cabin was a picture of luxury, polished leather seats, golden accents, and an unmistakable air of sophistication that made each passenger feel like they belonged to an elite club. Passengers moved effortlessly, some pulling high-end luggage behind them, others clutching designer handbags. The flight crew, dressed in crisp, tailored uniforms, moved with practiced precision, offering glasses of chilled champagne with polite, well-rehearsed smiles. Soft, ambient music played in the background, blending seamlessly with the occasional murmur of conversation. It was the kind of setting where power, wealth, and exclusivity intertwined. Among those boarding was Naomi Williams, a woman in her late 30s, exuding an effortless elegance. Dressed in a tailored navy blazer and matching slacks, she carried herself with quiet confidence. She wasn't flashy, didn't seek attention, but there was something about her presence that was impossible to ignore. As Naomi stepped into the cabin, her steady gaze swept over the scene. She wasn't here for leisure. This trip had a purpose, one that held significance far beyond what anyone on this flight could imagine. She was on her way to oversee her ever-expanding empire. But for now, no one knew who she was, and she preferred it that way. Near the entrance, Lauren, the lead flight attendant, stood with perfect posture, her uniform impeccably pressed, her sharp features reflecting a sense of control. She greeted passengers one by one, her smile shifting subtly depending on who she was speaking to, warm and welcoming for some, noticeably colder for others. Lauren thrived on order, but her definition of order was often dictated by silent prejudices, ones she never spoke of, yet displayed in the smallest of ways. When Naomi approached, Lauren's smile faded slightly. "Welcome aboard," she said, the words devoid of warmth. Naomi didn't react, at least not outwardly. She simply nodded, unfazed. Just behind her, an older couple, Mr. and Mrs. Raymond, stepped into the cabin. They were well-dressed, clearly seasoned travelers who belonged to this world of exclusivity. Mrs. Raymond clutched a small knitting bag, her fingers already itching to get to work. Mr. Raymond carried a neatly folded newspaper, his expression one of mild curiosity as he observed his surroundings. Lauren's face lit up instantly. "Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Raymond. So lovely to have you with us again," she gushed, her voice dripping with enthusiasm. Naomi, having just received the starkly different greeting, glanced over her shoulder. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Yet, she remained composed, her face betraying nothing, but her eyes reflected an understanding of the unspoken dynamics at play. Passengers settled in. The crew moved through the aisles, ensuring every detail was in place. Lauren circled back to the Raymonds, offering them a bright smile. "Can I get you anything before takeoff?" she asked with genuine warmth. Mrs. Raymond shook her head politely, already absorbed in her knitting. Mr. Raymond simply gestured toward his coffee, silently confirming he was content. As Lauren walked past Naomi, the warmth disappeared. Her gaze flicked to Naomi's bag, neatly tucked beneath her seat, and her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. Not a word, not a glance of courtesy, just a cold, dismissive stride past her as if she wasn't even there. Has this ever happened to you? Have you ever noticed someone's attitude shift purely based on appearances? Share your experience in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Lauren Reed, in her early 40s, had spent years perfecting the art of control. Her pristine uniform, every strand of hair in place, and her sharp, calculated demeanor all spoke to a woman who valued structure above all else. But beneath that polished exterior was a mind that judged quickly and unapologetically. As she observed Naomi settling into her seat, a flicker of disapproval crossed her face. Something about Naomi unsettled her, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. It wasn't just her clothing, nor the quiet confidence she carried. It was something deeper, something that challenged the assumptions Lauren was so accustomed to making. And that made her uneasy. But what happened next? No one saw it coming. Naomi's quiet confidence unsettled Lauren more than she cared to admit. It wasn't just that Naomi didn't clamor for attention like so many of the passengers Lauren automatically deemed worthy of respect. It was the unwavering assurance she carried, the way she sat comfortably in her seat, completely unbothered by the scrutiny. In Lauren's mind, Naomi simply didn't belong here. She had already decided that, without a second thought. With quick, deliberate strides, Lauren closed the distance between them. Her lips stretched into a tight, forced smile, one that barely masked the condescension seeping from her voice. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said, her tone falsely polite but unmistakably firm. "I think you may be in the wrong section." Naomi lifted her gaze, meeting Lauren's eyes with a steady, unreadable expression. She didn't flinch, didn't react with the indignation Lauren perhaps expected. Instead, she simply spoke. "I believe this is my seat," she said, her voice smooth, composed. There was no hint of uncertainty, no room for doubt. Lauren's tight smile remained, but her patience thinned. Her tone sharpened. "I don't think so," she countered, her voice carrying just loud enough for others nearby to hear. "This section is exclusively reserved for our elite passengers." A ripple of attention spread through the nearby passengers. A well-known socialite, perched a few seats ahead, shifted slightly, tilting her head to get a better view of the unfolding exchange. Her curiosity was piqued, her expression one of amused interest. Across the aisle, a businessman, distinguished and sharp-eyed, glanced over as well, his brow furrowing slightly at the tension in Lauren's voice. Despite the gathering audience, Naomi remained composed. She held Lauren's gaze unwavering. "You might want to double-check your passenger list before making assumptions," she suggested, her tone cool but firm. Lauren's brows lifted, her irritation now barely concealed. "I don't need to check anything," she shot back, her words clipped and final. "I know exactly who belongs here and who doesn't." The air in the cabin thickened. Passengers exchanged subtle glances, some whispering behind hands, others choosing to avert their eyes, pretending not to notice. A few, however, couldn't help but murmur their opinions. "Why doesn't she just move if she's in the wrong seat?" someone muttered. Another shrugged dismissively. "She's probably trying to score a free upgrade." Lauren, emboldened by the silent support of those who agreed with her, crossed her arms. She lifted her chin, ensuring her voice carried for all to hear. "If you don't move to the back of the plane," she said, her tone sharpening into a warning, "I will have no choice but to call security." Naomi tilted her head slightly, her expression never breaking. If anything, her voice grew softer, yet the strength in it was undeniable. "Call whoever you need to," she said, her words deliberate. "But I'm not moving." A soft gasp escaped the socialite's lips, her perfectly styled hair bouncing slightly as she leaned in, eyes gleaming with interest. The businessman across the aisle, however, sat up straighter, his frown deepening. He didn't like the way this was playing out. Lauren, now visibly frustrated, turned sharply toward Grace, the junior flight attendant who stood near the back, watching nervously. "Grace," Lauren snapped, her patience worn thin. "Escort her to the back."
"Now."
Grace hesitated. She glanced between Naomi and Lauren, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. A flicker of doubt crossed her face. Shouldn't they check the passenger list first? After all, Naomi had suggested it. Wouldn't that clear everything up? But Lauren's sharp glare sent a clear message. Obey orders. Grace swallowed hard and took a small step forward. Naomi shifted slightly in her seat, her composure unwavering. Her voice, though calm, carried a quiet warning. "You might want to think carefully about what you're doing," she said softly. Lauren scoffed, waving off the remark like an annoying fly. "I know exactly what I'm doing," she replied coldly. "Now, get up. Have you ever been in a situation like this? How would you react if someone treated you unfairly on a flight? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more." Lauren's impatience grew by the second. She pointed toward the back of the plane, her voice rising in frustration. "You're not supposed to be here," she repeated, her words laced with finality. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. The tension crackled in the air like static before a storm. Naomi leaned back slightly, her eyes steady on Lauren's. "You shouldn't make assumptions about people," she said, her voice quieter now, but no less powerful. Lauren let out a short, humorless laugh, her smirk widening. "And you shouldn't be sitting in seats you didn't pay for," she quipped, her confidence unwavering. But then, just as the moment reached its peak, Naomi reached for her phone. She picked it up with deliberate ease, her calm expression never changing. Her fingers moved swiftly across the screen before she placed it back down on the armrest. Lauren narrowed her eyes. "You're making a mistake," Naomi said simply, her words hanging in the air between them. Lauren's scoff was immediate, dismissive. "We'll see about that," she muttered under her breath. She turned again to Grace, her impatience flaring.
"Now."
Grace hesitated once more. But the junior flight attendant, caught between obedience and uncertainty, took another reluctant step forward. And as the scene continued to unfold, more and more passengers took notice. Lauren, flustered now, struggled to maintain the same control she always prided herself on. The longer Naomi remained seated, the more the power dynamic in the exchange began to shift. And then, Lauren's voice rose again, cutting through the murmur of the cabin. "I'm going to ask you one last time," she said, her words now clipped, forceful. "Move to the back of the plane, or I will call security." Her frustration was unmistakable. Her voice carried a sharp edge, and the condescension in her tone was no longer masked. But Naomi? She simply looked up at her, her expression calm, her resolve unshaken. "I already told you, I'm not moving," she said again, her voice just as steady as before. There was something in her tone, something almost soothing yet unbreakable, something that only made Lauren's irritation boil over. And all around them, the passengers watched, some in disbelief, some in discomfort, others waiting to see what would happen next. Up ahead, the socialite leaned closer to her companion, whispering just loud enough to be overheard. And that was when everything changed.